As we look back on the year that was, I'd like to refocus our attention just for a moment away from the pandemic, away from politics, and instead remember two important anniversaries largely overlooked during this difficult year. The first, the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, the most destructive war in global history. The second, the 75th anniversary of the creation of the United Nations, a new ambitious structure designed to preserve the hard-won peace. As the number of participants in 1945 dwindles, there are fewer and fewer people to bear first-hand witness to the rise of the post-war order which has framed our world all these years. Thus today, we are very fortunate to hear directly from two members of our greatest generation personally involved in military and diplomatic efforts then. Dick Grout, now 100 years old, was among the first to land on Omaha Beach as part of the D-Day invasion, the pivotal step that led to the Allies winning the war. Isabel Kulski, who turns 102 in January, and who was my first boss at the State Department, was part of the U.S. diplomatic team responsible for working with our allies to create the United Nations in the waning days of the war. It's said that if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going. And as we think about the new year and all the global challenges ahead, let's take a moment to listen to two stories of how our world was changed 75 years ago. I'm Karen Pushel-Siegel, former diplomat and scholar, now living in Traverse City. Let's hear first from my good friend, Dick Grout, founding board chair of the International Affairs Forum and longtime resident of Leelanau County.
Hello, Dick, and thank you for talking with me today. In 1938, you enrolled at Brown University intent on studying economics. Why Brown?
My grandfather went to Brown. My father went to Brown. I had an uncle that went to Brown. I don't know why I wouldn't go there.
Your life changed, Dick, following Pearl Harbor and the U.S. entry into the war. I've read that many universities, including Brown, accelerated all of their academic programs in order to provide a steady flow of educated personnel to the armed forces. Was there any question in your mind of what you would do?
No, I think there's no question that I was going to get into the service, and I wanted to be involved like everybody else.
So did you get to choose what area of the military to join?
No. I took basic training, which is just something everybody gets, how to take orders, how to march, and all that stuff. And while I was taking basic training, they looked over my university records, and they said, you have a lot of math and engineering kind of things. You ought to be an officer in the engineers. So I went to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, which is a military engineering school. And I think it took something like 3 months, and I graduated as a second lieutenant. Within a week, I was on a ship on my way to England.
So by the end of 1942, you find yourself in England, from whence you would eventually be part of the D-Day invasion of Europe. But that wouldn't be for almost 2 years. In the meantime, you're only 22, a newly minted lieutenant. How did you spend your time?
So we're learning lots of interesting things, I think, like how to build a bridge and how to blow up stuff and things along the way that we would eventually find useful. One was a course in how to deal with the unexploded bombs, and that was a 1 week course in Bristol, England. And while I was there, I didn't have to study at night, so I went out on the town, and there was a country fair there. And I wandered around at the fair just for something to do, and I ran into a WAF, a female person in the Air Force in England. To make a long story short, I became quite interested in this lady, and usually we had Sundays off, so I bicycle, I think it was something like 30 miles down there on a Sunday afternoon to see her, and eventually married her.
Well, before you got that chance to marry, you had a lot to do. And as D-Day approached, where did your unit assemble to cross the English Channel?
On the English coast is a fairly sizable town called Weymouth, with a big, fairly good-sized harbor. I think it was about 60 miles across at that point to France.
Omaha Beach, where you landed on the Normandy coast, was heavily defended by entrenched German troops. It's no exaggeration to say that you were about to land at the most dangerous place of D-Day. What are your recollections?
We got onto landing craft on the night of June 4th, expecting to land the next day on the 5th. And as history shows, it was delayed one day. So we were on board the landing craft the night of the 4th and the night of the 5th. There was no place to sleep or anything, and all the men were sleeping on deck, open deck. Just waited, I guess. Now, I think really I don't know if they were anxious to get involved, but we were anxious to move and get going, not just sit there. The sun was just coming up as we getting close to France. So we could see the beach, and I can't remember seeing anybody on it when we came in. We were one of the first. So we knew about where we were going to land. The landing craft where we spent the night was able to go right up to the shore, and then that bow opens up, and you go off. And we almost walked onto dry land, not quite. We kind of waded in up to our waist, perhaps another 15, 20 feet, and then we were on the shore. But the beach was under heavy fire at that time from the Germans, but particularly small arms fire, because the German friends were up in the hills looking down at the beach. The first thing you do is look for some kind of cover, where you could get away, particularly from that small arms stuff. And there were, unfortunately, men that were getting hit rather regularly and that kind of thing. It was just a mess.
Right. And what was your immediate task?
Our specific job was to open up an exit from the beach, so as later on in the day, as vehicles, tanks, and so forth came in, that would be able to get off the beach. And there was a road coming from the hills above, just a two-track road. There was a wall at the beach end. In other words, it came down this road from the hills, so we were prepared to open up the exit by getting rid of the wall. And the problem was to get a little bit organized when we got on the shore and start to do something.
So you're under heavy fire. It's a mess, as you say. Didn't you think about your personal safety?
I didn't think that way.
Mm-hmm.
I was the officer in charge of this group. There was about maybe 15 of us that were supposed to do this. So I said, well, I got to stay here and give some direction to these guys. And I didn't think too much about, getting hit myself. There were places you could get once in a while behind a big log or something, some just whatever protection. So I don't know. I was just dedicated to trying to keep these guys together and get to do the job that they were there to do. So I'd say even late in the afternoon, there were beginning to get off the beach and up this two-track road that I described, so that by the time it was nightfall, we were at the top of the hills around there.
Dick, how would you describe your job as a combat engineer?
What our mission was to do whatever is required to keep on moving forward, other than being in the front line shooting at people. That would mean building bridges, and we did that several places. It would mean clearing minefields, and there were two occasions I can remember when we were called on to physically support the infantry. One was out of St. Lo, which is one of the first cities that we ran into in France, and we got the whole operation got stuck there for a little while. And when they were ready to move out, we were called in as infantry.
To this very day, you remain a builder, Dick. Can you tell us a story about how you managed to build bridges in the middle of battle?
Immediately after the landing, we built a bridge across a canal. And where do you find the material to build a bridge? It turned out that there was a furniture factory in the area, and they had a lot of wood there. And it turned out that they were good-sized logs and so forth. We used those to build a bridge. When it was done, it was labeled the Mahogany Bridge. And I thought, there goes somebody's dining room table, the tank treads chewing it up. And the owner of the company was there at the time, a Frenchman, of course, and he was a little upset that we were taking his lumber. And so I wrote him a note on a piece of paper and said that the United States would reimburse him after the war. Of course, I never knew what happened there, but he had a little piece of paper that said he'd be paid for his wood.
And signed Dick Grout.
Yeah. For whatever that meant. Anyway, he had no choice, so he took it, and the bridge got built, and the armor moved forward. So
yeah. I believe it was another bridge where you were wounded badly enough to be evacuated back to England. You had made your way to the Ardennes in Belgium for what would become one of the most important battles of the war. Could you tell us about that?
I don't quite remember the date, but I think it was way into December by the time. On that particular one you're talking about, we were under heavy mortar fire. I mean, the Germans were just maybe a quarter of a mile on the other side of the river, so they knew we were there. They knew what we were trying to do, and I and a couple of others got hit on that one. Leg and back, it was pretty well torn up. Yeah.
The fighting you saw that day was the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, the largest and bloodiest battle fought by the U.S. in World War II that left 19,000 American soldiers dead, almost 50,000 wounded, and more than 20,000 missing in action. It was the battle that turned the tide, allowing Allied forces led by Patton to push into Germany. This included your unit?
I found out later they did participate in the crossing of the Rhine, and that was a major step forward for everybody. And I missed that particular operation.
Dick, as the end of the war in Europe finally seems to be in sight, were you even aware that half a world away, thousands of delegates from our allied nations were gathering in San Francisco to create a new structure, the United Nations, to prevent future war?
Was not aware of it. We really remembered was the dropping of the atomic bomb by President Truman, and we knew then that up until that point we thought we were going to get over to the Pacific and have to go there. So we were I would say, very happy the bomb had been dropped, although it was unfortunate for the Japanese people, but for us it meant that we probably were going to go home. I think what you're suggesting is that we might be thinking bigger thoughts, but it's more personal kind of thing, that I and my friends and so forth are going to get back to normal. And I wasn't thinking of a bigger picture. I guess I'd have to be honest about that.
Well, you didn't go home alone. In December of 1945, 3 years after graduating from Brown, from joining the military and arriving in England, you marry. Let's end with that story.
So I'm in Dumfries, the town where Norma lived, and it's our wedding day. We're going to be in a church, and going to be at noontime. So I went to wait to a local bar that was not far from the church and so forth, just to spend some time there. And I met a British officer also, and we had been in some of the same places together, so we got talking about it. And the time went, and all of a sudden this taxi driver comes rushing into the place, and he grabbed me and says, "Come with me, you're going to the church." And it had been Norma's father had told this taxi driver, "Go out and find this American officer somewhere and bring him to the church." So that's how I got to the church, but, quite sober and quite willingly.
Thank you, Dick. Thank you so much. Dick's story represents just one of the 16 million Americans who courageously fought to secure our freedom. Simultaneously, another diplomatic battle was going on to create the new structures that were intended to prevent future war. Most importantly, the United Nations. Like Dick, Isabel Kulski was focused on her education, first in Utah and then a master's degree at the University of Michigan, when war changed the trajectory of her life. With her new husband off fighting, she found her way to the U.S. State Department one day and simply walked in off the street to see if she could get a job. The job she would get would give her a front row seat to U.S. diplomatic plans for peacetime. And now let's welcome Isabel. And thank you so much for sharing your recollections about the founding of the United Nations in San Francisco. How old were you in 1945?
Oh, I'm just trying to calculate. I think I was 25 years old. 25 seemed pretty old to me at that time. But women, as soon as they got out of college, they were looking for marriage because you didn't want to become an old maid. That was kind of the feeling at the time. And most of my school friends got married right away. I started working in the State Department at the editorial section in November of 1943. I had been an English major. I was quite serious about my job.
When you started at the State Department, were there already plans underway to create the United Nations?
The UN was a build-up after 4 or 5 years of all these preceding meetings, starting in 1941 with the Atlantic Charter. After D-Day, the liberation of France and the Allied crossing of the Rhine, our office was publishing documents foreshadowing the shape of the world in peacetime.
So what happened to get you to the conference in San Francisco where the charter for the United Nations would be hammered out?
First of all, I got selected to go to the UN from my office there in the State Department. There were about 9 girls there, all girls, we called ourselves. My boss, when she picked me, I thought, that she's not going to choose me, but she did. So I tried to not show how excited that was.
Isabel, amidst all your preparations for this big event, you and the rest of the country learned that President Roosevelt has suddenly died. What impact did that have?
It was kind of shocking. It came at a time when we were preparing for the conference and couldn't focus on what was coming for the moment of that time. Roosevelt had been in office for, I guess it was about 12 years then, and it seemed like he had been there almost all our adult lives. Harry Truman took over as the vice president right away, but he didn't have much stature. People hardly knew who he was, and Roosevelt was the giant figure that kind of dominated the international scene. So we didn't know what would happen after that. But his administration carried on, so we were counting on that.
I've seen pictures of enormous crowds to witness President Roosevelt's coffin being carried along. Do you remember what it was like?
Yeah, because we walked from the State Department over to Pennsylvania Avenue and was trying to find our place, the surging crowds. But we got a glimpse anyhow of the cortege passing.
And then almost immediately you were on your way to San Francisco with the rest of the U.S. delegation. What do you remember of that train trip?
And it was a long journey, very long, to get there. But it was kind of an adventure, you know. We were always hoping to meet some important people on the train. We were young, and we were looking for celebrities that we might meet. That was kind of the way it was.
What happened when you finally arrived in San Francisco?
Our office was in the basement of, as I remember, of the Opera House there, where a lot of the meetings took place, and we were kind of sequestered there.
What was that process like of writing and editing the charter text?
Chapter by chapter, we would edit, and then they'd re-edit and redo it, and there was a lot of coming and going to write it and to get all the people who attended to agree. So that's why it lasted so long, because they were working out the actual words of the charter. And we had to be on call right there at the office, no matter whatever came to us. We had to be there on hand to do it. We couldn't go out and do a wander out on the streets and all that, you know.
Reading about this, I saw that there were 850 delegates. There were, 3,500 people, and then there was the press and the media. I mean, this was a huge group of people.
There was a lot going on, and I'm surprised to hear that there were 3,500 members, but I know they had kind of taken over that part of San Francisco. But so they put us up in a hotel. I think it was called Hotel California, and it was not one of the grand hotels of San Francisco, but we were all there as a group, and we were close to the Opera House, so we could walk there. We didn't have to take a bus, as I remember. And it was kind of exciting, of course, to be there. I had never been to San Francisco before.
The war is still going on, and so only the people who we are allied with were invited to San Francisco.
Right, and I think it was 50 nations, friendly and allied nations. We thought this was going to be a great thing. It was going to end the war, and it did end right in May, so there was a lot going on.
I think another thing that must have sent shockwaves through the conference is 5 days after the conference started, then Hitler had committed suicide.
That happened at the end of April, I guess, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And we were kind of relieved. We heard of Hitler's death by suicide in his bunker. We stopped work and emerged from our own bunker in the basement of the Opera House on VE Day, May 7, to celebrate victory on the streets of San Francisco with the wild crowds there at that time.
Isabel, getting agreement from so many countries must have been very difficult. What is a moment that stands out to you?
Well, toward the last week of the conference, everything stalled. There was this big disagreement because the Soviet delegation wanted each of their constituent republics to have a vote. We countered and said, well, we're going to have our one each for the 48 states, and that stopped everything. Stalin was showing his power at that time. I think we overestimated his power. We did. But they were important in winning the war. They had the big army. They had defeated the Germans on the Eastern Front, and the war was still going on in the Far East, and they were in part of that war too, and so were we. So couldn't dismiss them in any way.
Right. So while this hang-up was being resolved in Moscow, what did you do?
We were allowed to go off and kind of sightsee and see the giant redwoods, and we did a little wine tasting, and then we found ourselves toasting Stalin for giving us this leisure time. It wasn't subversive because we had just learned that General Eisenhower and Marshal Zhukov were toasting each other in their field encounters.
And then how many seats did the Soviet Union eventually get?
Well, they got 3: Belarus, Ukraine, and the USSR, and we got 1.
Yeah. Notwithstanding this, how did the overall process go from your perspective?
I think it went rather smoothly, considering that every paragraph and every word of the charter had to be voted on for all these delegations, and the editing and the wording worked out.
As the conference prepared to issue the new charter, agreed upon by all 50 nations, do I understand that your boss gave you the honor of taking one final look at it?
Yeah, she did. Yeah, that I remember.
I'll bet.
Virginia Angel, I guess she trusted me, and she said, go through it one last time. And I was really kind of trembling. I had this document, and I was very careful not to miss any mistakes, including spellings and commas and so on. But it had been read many times.
Isabel, would you describe those final days then for us?
The charter was signed on June 26th of 1945, and the conference came to an end. And President Truman he wasn't there, but he gave the closing address to the gathering, reflecting the hopeful mood of the country and of the world. Pacific War was still going on. When the last train pulled out of San Francisco to take us back to Washington, I doubt that anyone present had heard of the Manhattan Project. The successful testing of the atomic bomb was just a few weeks away, and who could imagine the wrenching picture, indeed the irony, of the first use of the bomb so soon after the conclusion of the world meeting dedicated to peace in that fateful year of 1945.
Isabel, thank you so much. You would go on and get first a master's degree at University of Michigan and then a PhD at Howard University. You became chief of the Soviet Foreign Policy Division in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research in the State Department. In your later years of retirement, you took up painting and writing, publishing at the age of 99 an amazing memoir about your Armenian family at the time of the genocide in Turkey. It has been an honor to hear a bit about how you got your start in 1945, appropriately on the world stage. Thank you. Thank you, Isabel.